Just in case you didn't think the Kayfabe commentaries were nerdy enough, got my man Tom Scioli in the house. He just finished this Gobots comic. If you didn't go out to the comic shop last Wednesday, do yourself a favor and grab this comic ASAP. It's really cool. I think you drew almost every page of this issue in the studio here.
Yeah, some portion at least.
You've been sort of a hero of mine going way back. When did you get the Xeric grant?
1998.
That's what I wanted to hear. So you've been in the game for 20 years.
Yeah.
20 plus years. Mm-hmm. When you got the Xeric grant, for those who don't know what the Xeric grant is, Peter Laird, co-creator of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, obviously achieved massive success with that property, and he philanthropically created the Xeric grant for future self-publishers to get a little bit of money, a little seed money for their publications. Whenever they would make the announcements for the Xeric grant winners, when would it happen? Like 2 times a year?
Yeah, twice a year, I think.
They would have the person's name, their comic, and the city where they lived. And when I saw Pittsburgh on that list, it blew my mind. Like, that win for you was like a win for me, and it let me know that there were like some actual people who drew comics that lived in this fucking town. What was the comic that you published with the Xeric money?
It was issue 1 of Myth of 8 Opus, and then there was like some money left over, or like some of the money I made from that first issue carried on to publish issue 2. And then issue 3, so basically like the first 5, it more or less financed like the first 5 issues of 8 Opus. From there, I started talking to Erik Larson about possibly doing something at Image. And
was he the publisher at the time?
Yeah, it was like, or no, actually, it was before he was the publisher. He wasn't the publisher yet. I think Jim Valentino was still the publisher, and so he was kind of helping me figure out how to maybe repackage 8 Opus, or and to bring it at Image. And then he like gave me some work on like a Marvel Fantastic Four comic that he was writing and doing like layouts for and stuff. The Image version of 8 Opus never quite came to fruition, but like a couple years later, when he did become publisher, and it was as opposed to like, okay, we got to get Jim Valentino to sign off on. It was like he was able to, just sort of like rubber stamp any project that he thought, made the cut. So he paired me up with Joe Casey specifically for us to sort of, go in a room together and come up with something. And then we came up with Godland, and that kind of started things going.
You did Godland for quite a long time. How many issues and how many years did you work on that project?
It was 38 issues, or 37 or 30. I think it was 38 issues, and worked on it from like 2004 like it came out 2005, and then ended like 2014, maybe 2013. Like it went on. That's a lot of that. There's Image went through a lot of ups and downs just in that time alone.
Comics.
Yeah, comics, of course. Comics
just went through turbulent times, that whole run. It's funny what you were saying about the idea of Erik Larson possibly repackaging 8 Opus for Image and all of that stuff, which obviously did not come to fruition. But a lot of people at home who are readers, or even harboring the idea of making a published comic or published anything, a piece of music, anything like that, what they only see are successes.
Yeah.
And by successes, I mean published work.
Right.
Because that's just getting published is the first hurdle. Then having something that sells, that's a whole another kettle of fish. When you were doing Godland, you were just doing the art duties on that.
Well, I mean, we collaborated on like the whole story, everything. Like we were throwing stuff back and forth. Like initially, like here's all the stuff I want to do. But then once we got in a role, then it was kind of like, okay, Joe's got the writing covered, let him do his thing, I'll do my thing. And there were maybe like a couple of issues throughout the run where he sort of like handed the mic over to me, and it's like, okay, why don't you, come up with this one?
Marvel method?
Yeah, Marvel method. Yeah, where I'd like, come up with and then he, figured out. There were like a couple like that, and then the sort of the ending, like the last few issues, was like I just sort of sat down, like, how are we going to end this? And I just kind of like typed up this like big document and then handed of like how I wanted the thing to sort of tie, and then I handed that to him, and then he went off and like riffed on that and built on it and brought in other elements. So it was very, very organic.
A lot of that book was drawn while you had a proper job. You were working a regular 9-to-5 job on top of the comics that you were drawing. And at the beginning of Godland, you were working on 2 monthly books, I think, for Image, right? There was Freedom Force.
Yeah, Freedom Force, and yeah, they
You
both sort of happened.
forgot about
Yeah, I totally forgot about it because Godland happened first. And then it was like a couple days later, Eric's like, we got this video game that they want to make do you want to do that too? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so then that one came out first. But to me, it was like Godland was the first one. But yeah, I totally forgot Freedom Force. Yeah.
That's a freelance lifestyle, guys. Feast or famine. And when it rains, it pours, and any other platitude that you could imagine to go along with what Tom just described there is often quite true for most creatives in the game. So you're working on Godland. Freedom Force was what, 6 issues or something? A couple issues?
Yeah, I think, 4. No, 6. Yeah, 6. You're right. It was 6. Yeah.
And that's the thing, man. Like when we started hanging out, early 2000, say 2002, 2003, you were sort of known in town. Like you were the guy on the bus who was bringing their inking apparatus and inking on the bus to work, to home. You would always bring a stack of pages every Wednesday. Free Comic Book Day is when we would hang out typically. And you always had more pages than everybody else, man. And not only that, but you were also working on some of your own ideas while you were doing the Godland thing, huh?
Yeah. I mean, American Barbarian sort of gestated during that process. Like I probably started American Barbarian in like 2008, which was, like a few years into Godland, and Godland still had a bunch more years to go. And I'm sure there are like other things I'm forgetting. Like you were saying, there's these things that nobody ever sees that you kind of start and don't quite become anything.
So what happens next? Like I know you quit comics for like 1 day.
Yeah, I mean,
you took a hiatus for a weekend.
I mean, there's there's like a brief, maybe a week or less than a week, but there was a point where I quit comics, or at least let people know that I quit comics. I had quit comics a bunch of times before then and after then, but just the world never knew about it. Would be like, okay, I'm done. This is it, and then sort of blow off some steam and then come back like, okay, yeah.
And then that's when the ball really got rolling, man. Like when you made that declaration, I remember seeing that online, and I went to your house and I said, you're not quitting comics. You're taking a break.
Yeah.
And the break was for a weekend.
Yeah, it was less than a week, yeah.
But sort of by doing that, everybody kind of realized, and by everybody I mean the publishers, kind of realized that you were available at that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, like around that time I sort of changed my way of going about things, because I think I had at least some of the elements of a Messiah complex, which like sounds a lot more grandiose than it is, but just the thought that like I'm doing work, I'm working really hard, I'm really proud of it, and if my work gets good enough, then people will come to me. Like I don't, and it wasn't
meritocracy.
Yeah, exactly. Meritocracy. Yeah, and
that's something that a lot of our creative brethren make the mistake of thinking that comics is that when it is very much not.
Right, it's not. You gotta make yourself, like, you gotta let people know. Like you said, they found out I was available. You gotta let people know you're available, and I just wasn't doing that. Like that part of the cartoonist job was just something I didn't feel comfortable with. I wasn't passionate about, like I was passionate about the work itself, and I could throw myself into that. The sort of self-promotion and things I was uncomfortable with, and just I didn't feel like I was good at it. But that was the point where I realized you need that.
It was something that wasn't really talked about before the early 2000s, because it was not something that the cartoonists really had much control over.
Sure, right.
What was the way for a freelance artist to promote themselves in the 90s and before? Send postcards to art directors. That's like what all the
books. Yeah. And the books still say that.
So we live in this time now where you can take an active role in putting yourself out there, and it's not a skill set that the average cartoonist thinks about very much. You know, and when you develop your influences when you're young and you're starting out, and you read interviews from your favorite artists, your favorite creative people, they're of an earlier generation, and for us, that earlier generation came before the internet, so we had to kind of like we kind of had to fill around and figure out how to make the internet work for us, for self promotion in like a less gross way than, you know, those douchebags who would have been at the Pittsburgh Comic-Con when I met you 1,000 times, but you always forget, who had bull horns and would say on the loudspeaker that, you know, come to booth A35, we will be roasting,
we'll be decapitating a
Pikachu
Barney doll or something.
Yeah. When the IDW guys got in touch with you, did they have something specific in mind, or did they just ask you what it is you wanted to do for them?
Well, I mean, like with the IDW getting in touch with me, it was like me reaching out to them. Like I decided, like, okay, I got to take things, like I can't take stuff for granted. What do people do to get work? So I looked at the submission policies of every company, and then I followed each one to the letter. And so I just followed the IDW submission policies, submitted work to the chat room or whatever that they told you to submit work to. I did that, and then shortly after that, John Barber contacted me, who's like he's now like the editor-in-chief.
So you sort of humbled yourself.
I humbled,
and you just did things the way they suggested by the books, and you got good results. Imagine that.
Right. Well, because I tried before in 1997, and it didn't work back then. So like, okay, that doesn't work. So I just stopped doing it for, like 8 years.
John Barber gets in touch, and then what goes down?
And then he gets in touch, and he was like, hey, if you're open to do work, I'll see what we got. And so it was he had like, okay, here's a cover assignment for Black Dynamite. And so I did a cover for Black Dynamite, and then I started pitching him like, oh, I got ideas for Black Dynamite stories. I got a story with this. I got a story with that. And then he said, well, like the people who own that property, like they sort of have their own stories they want to tell. They're not looking for people to pitch them stories. But it kind of in his mind, like, okay, I'm going to keep an eye out for something for Tom. And then maybe a week or so later, he called up and said, you know what, I was taking a bath. And this image came to me of the G.I. Joes landing
Was it necessary to have the bath part of the thing?
Well, at this point, that's part of the lore. Like, okay, that's in print now, that there was a bath involved. But, like, I relate to that, though, because, like, that's when the best ideas come. It's like when you're driving, when you're in the shower, like you get this magic happens. And I've heard like, Pharrell talk about that, like these songs come to him, and they just come to you in those, like, those moments.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, yeah, sure. But so he said, like, I saw this image of the G.I. Joe team landing on Cybertron, and that Cybertron, that it's kind of like, New Genesis or like Asgard or something. And, like, of course, that sound, and, like, would you want to do that? Would you want to make a comic that's that? And that just sounded so perfect to me, so amazing, and something I wouldn't have even thought that, like, of course they're not going to offer me Transformers and G.I. Joe, or Transformers or G.I. Joe, Transformers and G.I. Joe, like, of course they're not going to offer me. So that, like, blew my mind. And just, like, maybe the day before, I was, like, looking through an old sketchbook, and I found this idea that I wanted to pitch to Marvel for Strange Tales way back, years prior when Strange Tales was going on. And it was this idea of Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos during World War II doing a landing in Asgard and doing a raid in Asgard. And, like, the thing he was suggesting was, like, a hair's breadth away from, and I just thought, just the fact that I was looking at that the day, like, I hadn't seen that idea, I had forgotten that idea, and then a day later somebody calls me pitching something that's, like, right in that wheelhouse. So, like, yeah, I knew this was, like, the thing. And before, he's like, okay, well, this thing's not official. We got to get some approvals and this and that. So it's not official yet, but, keep it in mind. And, don't do any work on it or anything. Don't just it's because it's not a thing yet. But I didn't care. I'm like, okay, if this thing happens, it's going to be a huge shot. And it's a huge break. I'm going to need as much time as I can possibly get to work on this. I can't afford to wait until they approve it and go, and then it's like, okay, you got 2 months, you got a month, so I just, from that moment on, I pretended that this was my job, so that if it did get approved, I'd be ready to go, and then if I didn't do all that preparation and it did get approved, I'd be in the hole. So the worst thing that would happen is I would do a bunch of work on a comic that didn't happen. And so the way I kind of got myself psyched up for that was that, okay, if they cancel it, then I'll just like, reconfigure it into like a creator-owned thing, and I was going to call it Star Morphins versus the Icelandic Army, and it was going to be in like a fake language that didn't, some like fake Norwegian or German or kind of babble that I would come up with. But fortunately, I never had to do that because Transformers versus G.I. Joe became an actual comic.
I can attest too. You dropped the news on me that you were going to have this opportunity, in like October of whatever year that was, and I think you were grinding and putting down ideas, and as Howard Chaykin told us, he called it woodshedding. The idea that you just kind of go off on your own and put pencil to paper and just try to get better, try to learn, get ideas out of your system.
Yeah.
And you did that for 6 months.
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
it might have been
yeah,
a year.
might have not a year, but maybe 6 months, maybe 8 months. It had a very like long gestation process, and I did a lot of work, and then when it actually happened, I was ready to go. Like, and the funny thing is, I had an idea of how much work I wanted to have done before I like sat down and actually drew the comic, and when they fired the gun and said, okay, it's time to get working on this thing, I didn't have as much as I would have liked to have had the entire story figured out from start to finish. I had something of a story figured out, and it was at least 100 pages worth of typed synopsis. But even then, it's like, okay, you got to go. So even with a ton of prep time, I feel like there's really never enough. But that's just part of comics, and I've since gotten used to that. That in comics, like you're constantly under the gun.
Certainly when you're getting a page rate and you're working on licensed properties and you're in the employ of a publisher who is signing you up to do an idea, like you still have your creator-owned stuff that you just put whatever time you need into the work.
I mean, for me, I might be speaking just about me, and
of course
maybe,
you are.
Right, and maybe nobody else. but I don't know if anybody will relate to this, but I find that when I set aside time to work on a creator-owned thing, and on I keep, like, I've finished creator-owned things, but there's an energy that's missing from the process that isn't there when I'm doing like one of these licensed things or one of these things where there's like people. That really helps my process is having that.
Would you call that accountability? Like, you have an accountability to other people when you're working on something for $1 or for a publisher?
Yeah,
where you feel a pressure in that way?
A pressure, and it's like a healthy pressure. And it's not even about the money. Like, it's about disappointing people. Like, I'm more afraid of people being mad at me and disappointed with me than I am about like my own self-interest or getting money, and so I've enough about yourself, you can figure out how to like push your own buttons and get the results you want. So I've kind of figured that part out.
You don't want to disappoint people, and you don't want to make people mad at you, but you were working on 2 properties simultaneously that have a very, very passionate fan base.
Yeah.
Transformers, G.I. Joe. Of course you're going to make people insane because you're going to not do things by the books and you're going to add your own stamp on the property.
Yeah.
What was the response for Transformers, G.I. Joe?
Well, I wasn't expecting that either, because I thought, okay.
Wasn't expecting what?
Oh, I wasn't expecting the sort of scrutiny and the vociferous fan response of people who are like fans of these properties, because I knew where I was coming from. They didn't know me, but I knew where I was, and I thought, this is Transformers is your favorite thing, or G.I. Joe's your favorite thing. Here's this guy, Tom Scioli, and he's busting his ass to make the best possible version he can come up with of this thing that you love. Like, wouldn't you be like grateful? But it's not that at all. like that's crazy. That's crazy talk. But so, I mean, the reaction, like, it comes in stages, because first it's just an image. It's just, oh, here's the cover for the Free Comic Book Day comic that's not going to come out for a while. And when these like message boards of diehard fans get a hold of that, they like rip it apart. So that's the first input you get.
You're giving me flashbacks because I drew a variant cover for you for issue, was it maybe issue number 2?
Mm-hmm, yeah, issue 2.
And the image was released on, it was Easter of whatever that year was. Thankfully, it was released along with a Rob Liefeld variant cover. So when the Google alert hit my email, and I went to the forum that had between 40 and 50 posts about how much these variant covers suck and who are these douchebags who are doing this Transformers G.I. Joe thing. Thankfully, Rob was there to jump on most of the grenade, and he received most of the invective.
He draws the heat. He draws a lot of heat.
Yes. So the marks were like flipping out about that, and then your homeboy Eddie P just caught some shrapnel, slight flesh wounds. Why did he draw Bazooka's head so small?
Yeah.
That guy can't even draw. Yeah, so like we got to jump in head first and just see how passionate the fan base is for those properties, man. And I must say, like when you were preparing for this series, it was incredibly motivating to me for my X-Men project, because when you're dealing with these big corporations, not saying that IDW is a big corporation,
right,
but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You're playing with other people's money. There's some in between time before from when you're talking to them to when you finally get a chance to put pencil to paper, and it behooves you to get to work ASAP.
It's not wasted time. It's because everything we do is like preparation for the next thing. Like you got to keep polishing your sword and practicing your sword craft. So it's never wasted time.
You were doing your damnedest on that Transformers G.I. Joe thing to make it a monthly comic. You were able to keep up that pace for a little while, though.
Yeah.
And you know, like I hung out with you sort of a lot. Like, you know, I gave you keys to the compound here, and I would wake up and you would be here drawing. You and we traveled to Toronto for Free Comic Book Day, and we stayed in Toronto for like 2 weeks, basically. We stayed there for TCAF the following week.
Toronto 2 weekends and then the week in between.
Right, yeah. So like it was like 11 days, I think. And you never stopped working on this damn thing, man. And that continued for about 2 years.
For 2 years, yeah. I thought it was going to take me 1 year, and it took me 2. So it took me twice as long as I thought it would be. But it was intense.
Just as well, because I can't think of a good example of anybody who was able to maintain their sanity on a monthly project all by themselves. You know what I mean? Like Dave, Sim. Come on, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of corpses, of people who tried.
Yeah, you did those 12 issues.
Yeah, it was like 15 issues.
It was 15 issues.
Yeah.
Transformers G.I. Joe movie adaptation comes later.
Yeah. So while I was working on the story itself,
and when you were working on the story, wasn't there was a part where the G.I. Joe team confront Osama bin Laden or something?
They're in the cave. Yeah, so this is Osama bin Laden's still alive at this point when I'm working on this.
Is that true?
Yeah,
no, it can't be.
I think he was because maybe it was after. No, Osama bin Laden was not dead yet when I wrote that.
Shit,
he might have died at some point in the Transformers series, but he was still alive when I wrote, because this would have been the 0 issue, and it was going to start with like this sort of prologue that took place, in the early 21st century, and it's the G.I. Joe team in, Osama bin Laden. They're looking for Osama bin Laden. I don't think they ever find, but that's what they're looking for, and instead they find Transformers, But yeah, that's how it started, and
it's a surprise that the bean counters in Pawtucket, Rhode Island would axe that idea.
Right. Yeah. I don't think it ever got to them.
The cool thing is that you still got to publish it in the hardcover collection of.
I got to have my cake and eat it too, because I was the series that I was working on prior to Transformers versus G.I. Joe was Satan Soldier, which is like the craziest comic I'd ever done up until that point, and it was just off the wall, like just anything goes. And so I kind of brought that mindset to this. And so I made while I was still like doing the writing process, and maybe before they even approved the project, I was like, I need to see this as a comic. So I'm going to make a Satan Soldier version of Transformers versus G.I. Joe. And so Satan Soldier, I wrote it fast, I drew it fast, I colored it fast, and just, it was that kind of comic. And so I did that same approach. And so that was the story where it's and no self-censorship. Like leave it to somebody else to censor, or leave it to me later to censor, but like just go in and go all out.
Put all your cards on the table, get all the ideas out of your system, and then shuffle them around.
Yeah, and so that had they're in the cave looking for Osama bin Laden. They find Dr. Venom's biological weapons lab, and then they find a transformer, and they assume it's Bumblebee, and they assume it's like another Cobra device, some kind of Cobra super weapon. And they shoot him, but he's holding like this energon cube, and they like hit the energon and just makes this huge explosion, and kills Bumblebee. But then also at the beginning of the mission, it's Snake Eyes, Duke, and General Hawk, and each one look identical. You can't tell one from the other. They're these three blonde guys.
Aryan poster boys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they're just identical. They're on this mission. Like the only difference is the clothes that they're wearing. But Snake Eyes doesn't have a mask. He just has this like ninja outfit, but no mask. And so they're like triplets. And then by the end of this mission, they each, like that triplet thing is done, and they each go in three totally separate directions. The explosion like totally messes up Snake Eyes' face and like sends him in one direction, and then from the explosion, Hawk gets like an injury that makes him go from being like a field agent to like a desk jockey. Like he gets his desk job, and then Duke gets like it's like trial by fire because he's like a late comer to the Joe team. So he's like he's still in his prime and able. He didn't get it as bad as the other two.
So you had all these ideas in mind.
Yeah.
A lot of them did not see the light of day in the actual series. Like you got plenty on the page,
yes,
but you still had a lot more.
Sure, yeah.
And that's where this movie adaptation comes in?
Yeah,
the genesis of that?
Yeah, the movie adaptation. So like while I was working on the comic's going, and we were traveling a lot. I might have even been traveling with you, traveling a lot to shows and stuff. And while we'd be on the plane, I'd be writing stuff, and I had this like I wanted to collaborate. Like sometimes I'll get in like a real collaborative mood, and I'll like want to collaborate with other creators. And so I was trying to come up with ideas for like things to collaborate with different people and stuff. And so I thought, I want to do something like Rob is into the book. Rob Liefeld was into the book. He did a cover for the first issue, and so I thought I want to see if I can come up with something for Rob. And again, I came into it with maybe a little bit of hubris because I thought, you know what. I feel like the ultimate Rob Liefeld comic hasn't been made yet, and I want to be like when David Bowie would like produce an Iggy Pop,
yeah.
or he or Mott the Hoople or something, and like be like, I'm a fan of Mott the Hoople, I'm gonna make the ultimate Mott the Hoople song, So I was kind of thinking about that with Rob, and so I wrote this script that that had like all the stuff that I think Rob would be into, and I kept thinking like he's into like prime time, like big budget Hollywood ideas, like the Hollywood blockbuster. And so I was thinking in those terms and stuff, and I came up with a story, and then like we were on a flight or whatever, and then I got the exact idea, like where it's like it'll be a movie adaptation of the comic that I made. Like they make a movie out of this comic, and I'm gonna make the movie adaptation comic, and that way I can sort of like reset the continuity, tell like a really big broad story, but with all these gaps, like a comic book adaptation would have. This big story that's obviously been condensed into this one issue, and then get Rob to draw it. So that was like the genesis of the story. I sent the script to John Barber, and he said he like fell out of his chair reading it, like particularly like the ending, like and
it's a great ending.
Thanks. And so that was on the table, and so, like that was just one of like a million things that are just sort of floating in air as I'm like under the gun trying to finish, trying to work on this series day in and day out. So as it got closer to the end, we kept talking about like, hey, how about that movie adaptation, and then finally like it was lined up so that as soon as the series would end, I'd start work on the movie adaptation. And at that point, like I liked that script so much, I was like, I want to draw it. I'd like to draw this comic. And it felt to me like it would be a victory lap. And every step of the way of this comic, I always assume that like at any moment your comic could get canceled. And so every issue that came out, I'm like, maybe that's going to be the last issue. Maybe that's going to be the last issue. And with that, and so I thought, you know what? If we make it all the way to the end, this will be like this would be so much fun, because it was like such a fun script too. And then it happened. Like I got to do every single one.
And your iteration of Transformers G.I. Joe has gone beyond the comic page at this point. What kind of licensed memorabilia and stuff has come from your series? Skateboard?
Yeah, there was a skateboard. There were these figures that Kid Robot made based on my drawings, and my art is on the boxes and stuff, and the design, my version of Bazooka, Cobra Commander, Megatron, all that.
And you invented characters like the Baroness,
yeah,
Serpentress.
Yeah, Serpentress was something I'd invented, and yeah, there's a doll of that now. And I mean, when I was working on the thing, I mean, that didn't seem crazy to me. Like, I sort of had it in my head, like, I'm doing something. And I talked to John Barber about it. I'm like, have they ever made like a toy based on something you guys came up with in the comics? And he's like, oh yeah, that happens all the time. It's on a different timetable, because like those things take a while as opposed to a comic. But yeah, so that happened. And this, I mean, this isn't something I would brag about or anything, but like the most recent Transformers movie, I saw a bunch of ideas that didn't exist before my comic, that all of a sudden, or after my comic, are in a movie. So.
I remember, like, you were basically sitting exactly where you are right now. We moved the other drawing table just for the shot, but generally, I'd be sitting here drawing X-Men. You'd be over there, or Hip Hop Family Tree.
Yeah, Hip Hop at that point.
And and you'd be sitting over there drawing Transformers G.I. Joe. And when you were coming up with some of your initial ideas, you mentioned the idea of the Earth as being a transformer. Mm-hmm. And everybody we knew, we were just like, oh, that's too wild. Like, they'll never let you do that. That's insane.
I thought it was too wild.
And then you go see the movie. Now, I didn't see it. I'm going by your word.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm not lying, and I wouldn't lie to the Kayfabers out there.
Right. But in the movie, at the end of the movie, like, one of the reveals is that the Earth is a giant transformer, and it's been so all along. Just like this crazy idea. And it was me and John Barber, we talked about doing that way early. Like, when we were first throwing ideas, I drew this picture of like the Earth with as a robot, transformed into a robot, with like the shield was America. America was the shield, and the chest was Africa, and the head was Antarctica, and I said, like, my goal is to make a comic where when this happens, when this thing is revealed, it's totally natural. That when the Earth is a transformer shows up, you're like, of course the Earth is and that was my goal. And if we don't do that, then we just won't do it. But we're going to build to that. So John Barber, the editor, your editor on that project, he was down.
He was more than down with it, and he had said, like, oh yeah, like, I'd sometimes thought about maybe, Unicron is actually, because when you're coming up with these stories, you come up with like a million different like possibilities.
Let me just say something. Hey, John Barber, thanks a lot for not being conservative and square.
He'd been IDW in general had Transformers for like years by that point, and he'd been working on it for a bunch of years. So it's like there was a comfort level. Like, Hasbro was comfortable with him, he was comfortable with them, they trusted each other, you kind of knew. So that's how a project like this gets greenlit.
Movie adaptation comes out, reaches whatever success levels it does. How long is it from when that comic comes out to your work on was it Superpowers?
Superpowers,
or Super
yeah.
Friends?
Superpowers, yeah.
For DC Comics with Gerard Way.
Yeah, I mean, by the time the Transformers movie adaptation came out, I think I was already working on Superpowers at that point. So it's like I did that comic, I finished it, and I set it up so that when I finished it, like, that I'd have nothing but free time after that, so that I could like develop my own, create our own things and stuff. And so it ended, and then maybe like a week went by or something, and I was getting kind of antsy, and I'm like, I think I'd like to maybe line something else up, like while I'm working on these creator-owned things. And I think you had told me that, oh, Gerard Way has a line at DC. You should talk to him.
It just got announced.
Yeah, it had just gotten announced, and I hadn't heard. I heard about it from you, and so I thought, okay, yeah, let me drop Gerard a line. And I dropped him a line, and I thought, like, oh yeah, if I was there, I'd do Superpowers, which is kind of like, it's like a toy that they made in the early '80s. Of like the Justice League Super Friends, and it had some Jack Kirby elements in it. I thought that would be a perfect segue to go from Transformers and G.I. Joe to that. And so I pitched it, and he was like, yeah, that sounds great. And then that got rolling, and it was like a backup. It was going to be a backup in Doom Patrol, but then Doom Patrol ended up being longer than they thought it was going to be. So then they moved it to Cave Carson has a cybernetic eye. So it ran in there for like the first 6 issues. It's like the first trade of Cave Carson has like the full Superpowers story in it.
And how big of a story? It's like 21 pages?
I think it's not quite 20 pages. It's like 18 pages or something. And again, I drew more pages than ended up in the final thing just for my own process. That was my densest project to date, like in terms of page density. And it was like, okay, they're giving me 3 pages of real estate in the DC universe. So I'm gonna build this to the moon. Like, I'm gonna take those three pages and build as great as I can, and I'm gonna treat it like a full-time job. It's 3 pages, but I'm gonna treat it like it's 20, and I'm gonna like do everything I can, and I tried to maybe get like competitive with the rest of the book and be like, okay, you guys got your space. Here's my space, and then we're going to see who comes up with the most incredible comic. Like that. These are the kind of like mind games you sort of play to get the most out of yourself, and so that's how I approached it. Like, I still hear about it and stuff. It's it was kind of odd to me.
Can we talk about just allude to just some of the things that you put in there that didn't quite
didn't make the cut?
Yeah, and you'll say whatever you're comfortable with. I won't say a thing.
Yeah, no, I mean...
But you got to say,
okay,
Green Arrow's cock.
Yeah, Green Arrow's cock. But here's the craziest stuff I came up with. Like, most of it got in there. And, like, a lot of the things I thought, this is not going to fly, actually did. Like, and then, like, the things that... Like, yeah, so I drew... And again, I felt like, okay, I'm doing this for a corporation. They have a whole series of steps where they can decide whether something works or not. So I'm not going to censor myself. I'll leave. That's their job. My job is to create the greatest comic I can create. Yeah. and it's their job to figure out if that's the greatest comic for them. So yeah, Green Arrow's cock. I drew because Green Arrow's.
I remember you saying that like it was like a red herring. Like there was something more that you wanted to try like later in that strip. So like while they're focused on Green Arrow's penis over here, like they're not going to pay attention to this story point that you did over there.
Well, yeah. I mean, just doing Green Arrow period was a big deal because they told me like, yeah, there's certain that you can't use this character or that, there were limits about what characters I could use. So I wasn't sure if Green Arrow was in the range of characters I was allowed to use or not. They didn't say you can't use it, but I thought it's the possibility that they won't let me use Green Arrow. So that in itself was like, a big risk, but that I had, Green Arrow's naked in it. So I assumed like, okay,
what were some of the other things? Anything?
You mean in that particular comic? Or?
I want you to say the one, but if you...
Oh, no, I know the one you want to say. It's... like, yeah, it did not make the final... That did not make the final
Jim
cut.
Lee. Why not, man?
and it's funny because afterwards...
That was wild shit. Like, when you sent me that page, I couldn't believe what I saw. I'm like, man, if DC published this page, like, then the sky is no longer blue. 2 + 2 is no longer 4. They're very rigid gatekeepers of those properties.
Yeah, and I'm in my creating bubble. Like I'm just my goal is just to make the best comic I could make, and I thought that would make this like that. I can't not put that in the comic. This would make an amazing comic that would blow some minds. But afterwards, I kind of saw it from their perspective. And I thought, wait a second. To create this stuff, you have to put yourself in like a different mindset. You have to like think about a different set of like Every possibility needs to be on the table.
How long is it before the GoBots is in the air?
It was maybe not quite a year. It was not quite a year, and I was working on creator-owned stuff and things, and again I started kind of getting that antsiness about like I kind of want to maybe do like a thing, and I kept thinking of like GoBots, like, oh man, I got a GoBot story to tell, but I kept thinking like, no, you don't want to tell Go like that you don't need to be thinking about that. You got other fish to fry. Don't think. But like my imagination kept going there, and I've had that happen to me other times where like my imagination would go to a project that like, that for a million reasons maybe didn't seem like the right thing for me to work on, but if that's where your imagination goes, you investigate it, and so that's how GoBots went. I kept thinking about GoBots, and then I just floated it to IDW. I floated it to Justin Eisinger, who was like the editor of like the collections of like the Transformers versus G.I. Joe hardcover and all the collected versions of my work at IDW. American Barbarian, he was the editor on that, and so I just floated that to him. Like, what do you think about I got GoBots on the brain.
Has there ever been a GoBots comic?
Never. There's never been a GoBots comic. Now, in England, there was a GoBots magazine that ran for like a couple issues. That was like this like big thing, and it had like maybe like 7 pages of comics in it or something. But that doesn't count. That's not a comic book.
Do you think just like Transformers, that magazine cost maybe 2 or 3 pence less than the Transformers UK comic?
Yeah. It lasted way more than 2 pence long of series.
Oh, that's funny, man. So when you approach IDW about a GoBots, what is their response?
Well, when I sent it to Justin, he sent back like a photo of like his desk, which had like a GoBot on it, had dive of the GoBots, and he said, "Yeah, I'm definitely on board for that." And so it took a while to get.
What was the guy's name?
Justin Eisinger.
Hey, Justin, do you come from the same economic strata as I did? We could only afford GoBots too.
Yeah, I could only afford GoBot. I eventually got Transformers. I mean, I had GoBots for years, and then eventually got Transformers one Christmas, but they were like all secondhand GoBots, and like I knew like my
Transformers.
Oh, Transformers, yeah, secondhand GoBots. My parents had put them like they were in the box. They looked like, but they were obviously they had the decals already applied. They were obviously somebody else's, and they went. But like you can't fool a kid. You can't fool a kid with that stuff. But I didn't say a word. I was so grateful to have a bunch of Transformers. Like even if they were secondhand, I was so grateful to have actual Transformers that year.
I remember not long after you started coming up with what you were going to do for GoBots, some people at IDW got in touch with me about just what would I want to do for them. Like probably the first issue of Grand Design was out. Like Grand Design was in the air, probably like last December or something. And if I'm going to do license work, like I need to have royalties in place and junk like that. So we were just talking about that sort of thing. And the editor that I was speaking with, your GoBots thing was like fresh, and he knew that you're a Pittsburgh guy. Like clearly we know each other, so we would probably be speaking. And he was just talking about, we don't even know what GoBots is worth to us right now.
Right.
Like we don't know how to we don't know where to begin.
Yeah.
But it's clearly seems like you guys figured out the best delivery mechanism to the public with this thing. How many issues is this comic going to last?
It's going to run 5 issues.
5 issues,
Yeah.
100 pages on your part?
100 pages of mine.
How much more do you have to do?
I'm working on issue 5, so I got like 17 more pages to do.
Nice.
And then I'm done. I'm free.
Just to break kayfabe, do you have a watch on you right now?
No.
No? Just to break kayfabe, Tom came over to the house probably, an hour and 15 minutes ago, and it's pretty close to midnight, and we're just going to draw comics all night, and I figured, why not just bust out the camera? We have this new YouTube channel. Why not just let me interview you for an hour? And once we get done with this and we shut that camera off, we'll be moving that drawing table back over here, and we'll probably be drawing comics until like 5 or 6 in the morning.
At least another 3 hours.
How do you enjoy the process, man? Like,
Love it. GoBots in particular. I mean, it's been great because again, like after my experience, like I had a good experience with DC. It was awesome doing superpowers. Loved it, but I missed the freedom that I had. Like strangely enough, I have way more freedom and leeway with Hasbro than I did with DC. There's really, and it's understandably that they each company values their characters differently and what you should do with their characters. And I think part of that was maybe what drew me to GoBots too, was just knowing that there probably won't be a ton of oversight, that I can just sort of, tell the story I want to tell and use the characters that I want to use. That's the big thing. Like the other stuff we talked about, all those things, totally understandable. But to me, it's like, if you got the characters, just let me use them. Just let, and with GoBots, it's they're not going to be precious about their GoBots. I can use whatever GoBot I want.
Just storytelling wise, it looks like you're holding a different set of values when you put together a page of GoBots than you did with Transformers G.I. Joe. Like, can you describe off the top of your head some of the things that you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, it's learned, and Superpowers was part of that learning process because this has GoBots has way more panels per page than I had on Transformers, but it's pretty similar to the number of panels per page I had on Superpowers. So it was just sort of coming out of the problem solving of, okay, you only got 3 pages. How do you tell a sufficient amount of story in 3 pages? And so once I figured out how much pressure a page could bear, then it just became part of my toolbox. And it's like, oh wait, I can get a lot of stuff into a page. And so that happened with this. And I guess like the philosophy that I came at this with is different than the philosophy I came at Transformers versus G.I. Joe with. For Transformers versus G.I. Joe, I was aiming for spectacle, for big images, big moments. One of my guiding things was like, if I can tell the amount of story I want to tell in 1 image, that's optimal. If it takes 2 panels, then that's not as good. 3 panels is even worse. 4, but with this, it's a different approach. It's like I'm not going for spectacle. I'm going for flow, readability. And again, thinking of like, Dark Knight Returns or something where it's like, and you're flowing, you're reading, or newspaper comic reprints where it's like, it's just about you like getting in this. It's not about this big thing here. If a moment comes up where it's got to be big, that's fine. I'll do big. But I think in this, like maybe the biggest image I have is like a half a splash page, or like a half a page. And when you're doing that little, that rhythm, when a page comes up that's half a page, it feels like a double splash.
I find it remarkable to the aesthetic approach that you've taken with Transformers G.I. Joe and GoBots, the idea that these are toy brands and you're using the implements that we used when we were 5 years old to draw Optimus Prime. Like I see crayons in here. Clearly you don't ink anymore. This is pencil work.
Yeah, straight pencil, yeah.
Talk about the process a little bit and like give people a little clue into how you put a page of this stuff together.
The way I put a page together, I start with I'm working on an iPad, which this is like the first project I've worked on an iPad with, and the Apple Pencil, and I just go in there and I do my layout. First, like I have my story, and I come in, I'm doing the layout, figuring out the page with layout, redraw it a bunch of times, redraw it on multiple layers, keep drawing it until it's like pretty much everybody's where I want them to be and looking kind of how I want them to be. And then I print that up and then take a piece of Bristol board and lay that over it, tape the print up on the back, and then put all that on a light box.
So there's like this juggling act between digital, analog,
yeah,
because then you color a little bit in the computer.
Yeah, I trace it off onto the paper, and at that point I'm making my finished line work. So I'm trying to make it look as nice as I can, and do the finished line work. Scan that back into the computer, take that back on my iPad, and then I start coloring on there. And then once the coloring is done, then I sort of send it all back to like Photoshop, and on my laptop I'll do like the put together put it all together and maybe do a little bit of this or that, but it's mostly iPad, pencil, back to iPad.
fascinating. There'll be links in the description below where you could find Tom on every social media platform that matters: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff. We'll do it again, man, without any circumscribed bullshit in mind. Maybe it'll be just like straight podcast type thing or something like that, where we're just riffing on shit like we do in the car on the way to a comic book convention. But listen, guys, I'm on my last issue of X-Men. He's on his last issue of GoBots. We're shutting this fucking camera down, and we're going to get back to work on comics. Peace.
See ya.